Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tim Powell with Q1 Consulting. Going to get started here on our webinar regarding food away from home, or it's really a fancy way of saying food at restaurants or food at takeaway. The topic will be avoiding costly food mistakes. I'm going to give you just a few examples of us, of Q1 Consulting, what we've done. It's a relatively new practice for us. I've come from about 15 years of consulting in food and beverage. We provide intelligence and consumer insights for restaurant chains, food suppliers. I do a lot of common interest studies and proprietary type studies. Some of our solutions, which you can find on our website, are pretty general because, again, it really depends on the issues that certain suppliers or operators or stakeholders may have. These include consulting for growth, help with brand, any customer insights or opportunity assessments, and then just some of the companies that we've done work with as a whole, those of us included in the firm who have been elsewhere, some of the contacts that we have today. So that's the commercial. Let's jump into what our topic is today, which is fairly timely. We're going to talk about food safety, which really includes the elements of foodborne illnesses, food safety, and sanitation, which goes with ensuring that food is safe to consume. And then also food waste, which plays a role in food safety as well. And we'll also learn where it helps with profitability and costs. So there are certainly benefits of including food waste as a part of any food safety program. And then at the end, if we have any questions, you'll be able to, of course, write on here any questions to me. Anything that I see show up, I will try to answer those probably at the end. Perhaps if I see them while I'm presenting, I'll answer those. I did want to start out with the jungle. I just had to, because we talk a lot about food safety today and what's happened with Chipotle, Jenny's Ice Cream, Bluebell, some of the most recent ones, all the way to Jack in the Box in 1993. And really the jungle, when I look at what happened in 1906, so Upton Sinclair was what you called a muckraker back in the day. He was a journalist, almost like Truman Capote, where he wrote journalist stories based on novellas versus journalism, and that's what the jungle was. He was paid $500 to write about the Chicago meatpacking conditions. His main character was about an immigrant who was trying to make ends meet in Chicago, and one of the what he did in a lot of his research was to go into these meatpacking plants. And just to read you out some of the things that came out of this, for example, there would be meat stored in great piles and rooms, and the water from leaky roofs would drip over it, and thousands of rats would race about on it. It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of dry dung of rats. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poison bread out for them. They would die, and then rats, bread, and meat would go into the hoppers together. This is no fairy story and no joke. The meat would be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat, even when he saw one. There were things that went into the sausage in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. So that's growth, and I thought I would start out with that because that really led to our modern day FDA. It led to the Meat Inspection Act, the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, and during Teddy Roosevelt's administration, it eventually turned into the Food and Drug Administration. So that sort of gives us the grounds us, I think, for what we're going to talk about today. So let's jump to our first part, which is really the foodborne illnesses. And this really defined is a disease caused by consuming any consumer that will drink food or eat food or drink, and it may be contaminated with bacteria, parasites, viruses, or chemicals. There are more than 250 known diseases, foodborne diseases. And some of those issues that we see, or really the culprits of it, are a lot that we've heard about in the press. Some of those that you see there are leafy greens, eggs, tuna, oysters, potatoes, cream cheese, or cheese and ice cream, even produce with tomatoes and berries. It's estimated that 1 in 6 Americans get sick from and 3,000 die of foodborne diseases. We'll see which one of those is most common. Reducing foodborne illnesses by 10% would keep 5 million Americans from getting sick each year, and these are CDC numbers, by the way. And then preventing a single fatal case of E. coli infection would save an estimated $7 million. So when we look at this, what really are the most common pathogens, or what are those foodborne illnesses that cause it? We hear a lot about E. coli. E. coli is in the news a lot. Interestingly, though, E. coli, when it is contracted, can be very violent. There's the last number I saw, there's 2,138 hospitalizations and 30 deaths last year for E. coli alone. But when you look at and those are deaths, and that's up in the right-hand corner, but when you look at the pathogens that contribute to domestically acquired foodborne illnesses, not necessarily deaths, it's deaths, it's the norovirus. And the norovirus is really the one that's most common, and what we saw in Chipotle. It's one that can be contracted very, very quickly and very easily. So 58% of those are due to that, and we're going to talk about these a little closer. Now, salmonella is actually, even though it's 11% of foodborne illnesses, it accounts for about 380 people died from salmonella last year. Foster Farms a few years ago had 634 people sickened because of salmonella. And then some of the others that are included in here also account for some of those illnesses. But for the most part, we see norovirus as being the main culprit of this, as was in Chipotle. So the sources of foodborne illnesses come from a number of areas, and food from unsafe sources, if that's supply chain, if you're using organic foods, or if you don't necessarily understand your supply chain, if you're using a kitchen or a commissary, which is pretty common right now in the convenience store industry. It's even common in some limited service restaurants, because if you look at Starbucks, for example, they're using a commissary. They don't have a kitchen. If it's a third-party commissary, you want to be very careful that you vetted out those suppliers. Another is just the improper holding time and temperature, and there's differences between different types of foods. And even though a temperature for food may be 41 degrees, for example, that doesn't mean that's the temperature of the refrigerator. So there's little differences that need to be, or refrigeration temperature, little things that need to be tweaked. Inadequate cooking, which was Jack in the Box. In 1993, they didn't cook their hamburgers to 170 degrees. They cooked them a little less than that to keep them more rare, and then they of course sickened a number of people. The poor personal hygiene, which really comes down to restaurant staff, very important. That's at an operator standpoint. And then any equipment that is contaminated, cross-contamination is a big one. In one of the studies from the TORC report, which was SCA did a few years ago, they asked both restaurant operators and consumers an opinion based on food safety and foodborne illnesses. And of consumers, 78% of consumers said that they were at least somewhat concerned. So that's concerned and very concerned and somewhat concerned about contracting a foodborne illness. When the question was asked of operators, the percent who expressed concern over spreading a foodborne illness, That's 42%. Now, this obviously was done a few years ago. I would think that percentage point-wise it might be increased just based on what's happened with Chipotle. But for the most part, I think we do see this disconnect between what consumers look at as potential venues that might cause illness, and what are the cues of that? Well, if the restaurant doesn't look clean, or if the staff doesn't look clean, or what they've heard from their friends, and now with social media, all of those things contribute to this perception of consumers. And we always say that, of course, having clean bathrooms mean that it's more likely that the kitchen is going to be clean as well. So those are certainly cues that make consumers more comfortable. Also, 22% of operators were not concerned about spreading a foodborne illness. That was another thing that came out from one of those. So what is the impact of a foodborne illness? What happens? Why don't we want it? Now, I wrote a blog a few weeks ago about this, and it seemed to me that Chipotle, which has been in the news, was able to avoid some of these things. But typically, this is what we say as a company, and in my work, what I've said is you really want to avoid this, particularly if you're in the genesis of a food service operation or segment. Let's just consider if you're a food truck or if you're Walgreens on State Street in Chicago. If you have a foodborne illness outbreak, any potential customer sales could be completely removed at that point. Reputation, especially how word spreads like wildfire now on social media, lower staff morale. Certainly, working for a place that peer groups and customers are very paranoid and uncomfortable with, because you have to remember your staff are also customers too, some of your consumers. Lawsuits and legal fees will typically follow staff getting sick. Staff often will eat the same product, and they'll get sick, and then in the case of Chipotle, they didn't have sick days implemented, paid sick days, and that of course is something that becomes a staffing problem. Of course, insurance premiums go up, and then there's also the necessary step of staff retraining. If it is a food handling issue, food storage issue, becomes something that has to happen in the hands of, the operator. So looking at Chipotle, just what's happened since July. So in July, what happened? We had two customers had the norovirus outbreaks, and that was one thing. So we thought, okay, that's July, norovirus. We heard about that. It was a little quieter. A month or so later, we saw two E. coli outbreaks and one salmonella outbreak. So the first one was I believe in California. We had one in Minnesota, and we had one in Boston, Massachusetts. So that was the first cue that these are not happening, or we're not zeroing in on just one spot. This is happening more on a national basis. So since that's happened, Chipotle is facing a criminal investigation from the government. Also, an investor filed a lawsuit in January. There's clearly been a drop in their stock prices. Recently, their same-store sales for the fourth quarter came out. It was 14.6% down. And the company acknowledges in the annual report that they do things differently. This was probably back in January, so while this was going on, I think one of the challenges many of us had who were in this industry was when we looked at Jack in the Box and we looked at Subway a few years ago in New York where it was rat infested. It was either that or Taco Bell, where it hit social media, that how can Chipotle continue to say that they're going to continue to purchase things from a source and source things the way they do, but still recognize that they're making people sick. So they did close the stores on the 6th of February, all of them. for a couple hours just to relook and reevaluate its approach to the public. And they're meeting with the FDA and CDC to figure out how to align safety practice with that core business model. Now, we have to think about it. Their core business model has been fresh ingredients. And there's even been some mention of customers saying they don't care if they die and they'll eat it. I mean, this isn't a huge representation of their customers, but some of them say, you know, I'll get sick because I believe so much in Chipotle. So it's going to be difficult, I think, for them to detach their corporate brand and their corporate MO, who they are, from this supply chain issue that they're running into. So it's still something that we kind of have to keep our eyes on. It's still, it hasn't shaken out completely yet. So looking at food safety and the basic precautions, I know we have quite a few restaurant operators on this webinar, but I'm trying to direct this both toward a supplier standpoint and operators. From this standpoint, I would think that anytime that you look at the very basics of food safety, it's making sure that staff understands that their hands must be washed. And by using gloves, we say maybe because if those same gloves are being used to handle cash and then also handle food, then you've already, there's really no point in handling and using gloves anymore. But gloves, in most parts, if they're used properly, are suggested. You know, observing personal hygiene, just making sure, again, very, very hygienic, and making sure that staff is clean, has clean habits. And then other things, the chilling and holding food properly, and heating and holding food properly, because there's certainly a couple temperatures there and amounts of time that those can be left out, avoiding the cross contamination, and then cleaning and sanitizing. So for instance, anything that is going to be heated and in a holding cabinet, and this is really important now because of the grab and go growth. It's not only happening in retail food service, it's happening in non-traditional, whether it's a bookstore, or if it's Starbucks, or if it's at the airport, or it might even be a casual dining restaurant that has grab and go, so that they can capture some of the lunch day part. Well, what does that mean? That means that we really have to be very careful here, because it is your brand, and if there is any sort of foodborne illness outbreak that occurs because of this grab and go, you want to ensure that you're keeping things heated to the proper temperature. So anything being held needs to have an internal temperature of 141 degrees. Anything that's being held cold in a chilled case needs to be below 41 degrees. So typically anything has a 7-day maximum life for food held at 41 degrees or below. So typically you hope that those items are consumed quicker, but that's usually the maximum life. Anything past that should be thrown out. Potentially hazardous food. These are foods that favor bacterial growth. It's what the government typically will refer to specifically as this. It means that it requires temperature control because it is in a form capable of supporting the rapid and progressive growth of infectious or toxigenic microorganisms. And really those foods that are most susceptible, anything you have out that's meat, you know, if it's a turkey sandwich or poultry, if it's eggs, dairy, seafood, even cut melon, which I know there's a lot of places that may not think of cut produce, but it's possible. It's just as susceptible, if being left out, to carry certain toxigenic or infectious organisms. Cooked rice and potatoes are also another example of those. And the ways to sort of avoid these is the way that food can be thawed. And there's really only 4 safe ways to thaw food. You know, leaving it out is not really. If it's chicken that is going to be thawed, leaving it out into room temperature is not the way to do it. even though it's frozen. The way to do it is make sure it's in the refrigerator, it's 41 degrees or below. Under running water, if it's 70 degrees Fahrenheit or below, is always a good idea. The microwave is also an option. Now, it does change the chemical makeup of the food, and that's one of the things that the companies have to face if they want to develop food that tastes good, yet they have to microwave it. You're kind of in a quandary. So you want to ensure food safety, but you also want to ensure that your food is quality, because people are buying quality in something that has a high flavor profile. But anything that is cooked in the microwave or thawed in the microwave does have to be cooked immediately. And of course, anything that's frozen or raw can be, or frozen can be simply cooked as a part of the process. Now, cross-contamination is, it seems like the food service industry, at least casual dining, full service, limited service, has gotten a good handle on this. I've been in certain places and units that, and this is fairly common, where you may have a green cutting board for produce, you may have red for meat, you may have a different one for, say, bread items. So that's a very smart idea, considering you have chefs that are working in different stations, and you just want to ensure that there's zero cross-contamination going on. And in its term, cross-contamination is any harmful bacteria or allergens that spreads to food from other food, surfaces, hands, or equipment. So developing a good and executing a good personal hygiene program is another one of those. You know, sneezing on food, which you know, we may laugh at, sneezing in your hands. All of those things, you need to make sure that you're sneezing into an arm, or you're trying to leave the room. Anytime that happens, the spread of germs, hands need to be washed. Also, using separate equipment. If you're using a grill for raw chicken, you know, not a good idea probably to throw on produce or vegetables at the same time. Make sure all of the surfaces that were used for one thing are not used again for something different. You know, purchasing prepared food is a good way to do it. This happens a lot. Ready-to-eat food. You know, this is a good idea, not for every operation, but ready-to-eat food that just needs to be reheated certainly helps with anything that might occur with you know, foodborne illness. And then storing the food properly. And a little bit about that is separating the raw and cooked foods. It's usually recommended by the FDA that air temperature is about 38 degrees. That's the refrigerated temperature to achieve the temperature of 41 degrees for the internal foods. Make sure that everything that is included in that store or in that restaurant is labeled, it's dated, and it's refrigerated, and stored in proper containers. You know, using open shelving and not covering foods with foil, because foil, some of these can turn into a Petri dish if you're not careful. Wrapping food properly, storing non-food items separately from foods, and FIFO, first in, first out. Really the key is checking the temperature of the food upon the receipt and from your distributor, whoever it might come from, and reject any potentially hazardous foods that fall outside of that accepted range. Let's move over to food waste. Food waste is defined as pre-consumer food waste is discarded by staff within the control of the C-store operator. There's really a lot of issues with food waste. The studies that have been done lately have found that you know, operators are really just cooking way too much in some cases. Restaurants may be preparing too much. So as opposed to what do we do with this food waste, it's really why are we cooking so much food is the question. So the EPA says that food is the #1 thing that goes into a landfill. And a study that was done oops, move here. Back in benefits understanding, hold on here. A study that was done at the Swedish Medical Center, for example, this is a couple years ago. He found that Chef Eisenberg, his name was Eric Eisenberg, he was a chef at the Swedish Medical Center in Seattle. And what he started using was a waste tracking system. And what it does is combine scales and touch screens for the back end that can offer analytical insights. So he used this back in 2011. What he found was that after a year, I think his food costs fell by double digits in the first month. He found that he reduced production of baked goods by 43%, deli meats by 50%, salads by 40%, and sandwiches by 75%. And as he says, we were just making plain too much food. And so they experienced a great deal of awareness of what they were throwing away. So when you look at some of the benefits of understanding this, is not only is it a matter of how to not throw away so much, but it's also can help your top and bottom line. It can also help with making consumers feel that you're doing more a socially responsible thing. So if you can get controls in place for this, certainly there's more consistency in product execution because you're being very minimal in the way that you do things. Profits are increased because costs go down. If you're for instance, if deli meats are down by 50% or salads are down by 40%, I mean that's already a cost reduction, which turns into gross profit. And then, of course, sharing that with the staff, increasing employee awareness and participation in food waste reduction and control. So those are all necessary items. And one great example of this is coffee. We often get asked what are the food costs, what are the target food costs for certain food items in a food service establishment. A lot of times chains will look at food simply from a chain cost or for a food cost percentage. So instead of looking at the dollar percentage or the dollar itself, because typically, as we know, you're putting dollars in the banks, you're not putting in the bank, you're not putting percentages. So if we look at an example of coffee, so if it's been out for 4 hours, let's just consider this for a few minutes. All right, so the coffee cost, a portion pack, let's say that you use for coffee is $1.07, and it typically yields five cups at 12 ounces. That makes the unit cost 21 cents, and you can sell it at 99 cents. So you've roughly got right here, everything you sell is 78 cents profitability. Makes the gross revenue 5 times 99 cents at $4.95. So you eventually realize that it's been sitting out for a while, so the bottom's starting to get black, and we should probably throw away 2 cups. So you need that waste tolerance for your coffee. So you throw out those 2 cups. So when you take out those 2 cups, your adjusted revenue is 3 times 99 cents, $2.97, and then you still have an adjusted gross profit of $1.09. So you have, as you see, it's coffee, iced tea, beverages, and many of these items are very profitable, as we know. But it goes the same as any product that you're offering, any grab-and-go item, anything that's been sitting out, whether it's a buffet, because it isn't necessarily just the food safety issue. It's also showing consumers and your patrons that you're very caring. If you're setting timers on your coffee, that shows them you're looking at fresh coffee and ensures quality, flavor profile, and it shows hospitality. That it's more than just a sale, that you care about the customer, you want to provide quality things. I get the question sometimes about what kind of waste tolerance should I have? When should I throw out a certain item? When should I throw the coffee out? Or how much should I throw out? So waste tolerance should be somewhere in the 4% to maybe 12% range is a good idea. You're going to be typically throwing that out because you have to look at if you keep that item longer anyway, there's a lower chance it will be sold. and it also gives you the opportunity to show to consumers, and it obviously tastes better. You can show that you care very much about how quality your product is, and keeping quality product out there. So what are some of the implications for those on here? Well, one is just from an execution standpoint, from management, incorporate a good personal hygiene policy system-wide into your food safety plan. Now, the Food Safe program by the NRA, or ServSafe, obviously does that. Train food handlers on personal hygiene policies. Make sure every employee every time understands that very, very well. Model good hygiene practices for workers at all times. Ensure that your managers are supervising workers' practices continuously. And it's extremely important that becomes a part of policy and a part of the corporate culture, so that it's very easy to remember. So it doesn't become a pain to do it. It becomes a pleasure to do something like that. If you can get that mindset for the 18 to 20-year-olds working in restaurants, that's where you want to be. And then when policies do change, when laws and regulations change, ensure that that's being reported system-wide regularly. And finally, I think both operators and suppliers can be accountable here. Suppliers are in a position to take information that they learn from consumer findings, from work that they do with consultants, from the work that they do themselves to help operators influence education and training at a unit level. Team goals and team rewards, if there's sponsorships that could be provided by supplier partners, that helps build relationships with operators. And it is everyone's responsibilities, but individual staff members are accountable. It just takes one person who has the cross-contamination or isn't hygienic to create one outbreak. So it's very, very important that each person is involved. And then designating a food safety control champion for each store has worked well for a lot of concepts that really embrace this. And the more stores you get, the more challenging it gets, but it's a top-down approach and something that should be reminded and instilled every day. So the overall conclusions are ensuring that foodborne illness strategies, food safety strategies, food waste, all of these things are really an element that need to be part of any corporate mission. Also, customer service safety is truly in the hands of staff, making sure that if you have staff cleaning down tables, it's not a dirty old bar towel, for example, that they don't see. I was in a restaurant once where it was a sandwich shop, and they were making my sandwich, and he had gloves on, but he pulled out the gum with his hand, threw it out, and then started making a sandwich. So food safety staff really need to make sure that they understand that they're putting their best face forward. I didn't go back there again, and I don't know who else saw that either. So even though I didn't eat that food, that's a big no-no. Make food service safety a value add for patrons. It can be. If you have alarms on, or if you say we change our sandwiches, our to-go case, our buffet, whatever it might be, a breakfast buffet, every 2 hours, or we're making sure it's fresh. You're not going to get an unfresh cup of coffee. That can be a real consumer value add, and that's a good place to be, even if you think that you're throwing stuff out and it's lost revenue. As you see in the example, it can really mean more in customer satisfaction. So food waste not necessarily a bad thing in that case. So with that, I went a little over my half hour, but I wanted to at least make sure we got through all of it. If there are any questions, please feel free to send those to me. I didn't put my, I don't see questions here, any chat. So anyway, thanks everyone for your time. If you have any questions, please let me know. And my number is down below. And this will be available for download if you need it. Thank you.